So what's going to happen here today is I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. Then we have two fabulous volunteers who have offered to let us, I'm going to say beat the crap out of them for about another 15 or so minutes. We've got resumes. We've changed all the important information, of course. And then we're going to open up for Q&A. All right, so please do ask questions. Just don't ask them out loud because if you do, we won't hear you. All right, without any further ado, let's dig into it. Dealing with a ding. All right, like we said, I'm going to do three things today. First, of course, is my amazing presentation. One thing to keep in mind in this business of ours, which is application consulting, MBA application consulting, there's a lot of misinformation. All right, there's a lot of, hey, I think you should do this, and I think you should do that. Today, most of what we're going to talk about is common sense. Okay, and if anybody ever gives you advice that strikes you as counterintuitive, I got to tell you, there's a good chance it's bad advice. All right, so hopefully you'll see that through what we talk about today. All right, let's get into it. The bottom line is, and most people don't speak this way, but the overwhelming majority of people who apply to top 25 programs will not get in. Okay? 77%. Maybe that's last year's number. But the fact remains, it's not pretty, right? Most people are going to get dinged, period. Okay? For international applicants especially, it's even harder, right? The percent of classes that are international is not increasing, certainly not at the same rate as the number of international people applying. All right? If you're all on this webinar, it's because you were dinged, right? It's a crappy feeling. All right? It's so crappy that you're willing to spend your evening or your morning with me. So we're going to get into it. All right, the good news is we've been doing this a long time. All right, we're rarely surprised. Okay, there's a logic to this. This is especially true with business school applications. There's a logic to it. It's a game. Okay, if you didn't get in, it's because some number of these three things happened. Okay, the first is there's a weakness in your background, right? Whether it's your work experience, whether it's extracurriculars, whether it's you're too old, whether it's you're unemployed, okay? There's a weakness in your background, okay? Your work experience stinks. You work for a company that nobody's heard of, all right? That's the first one. All right, the second one is maybe your background is okay, but the application itself was weak, right? I don't care how good your experience is. If your essays suck, you're not going to get in, right? People say, John, what's the most important thing? Is it your work experience or is it your essays? To me, they're equally as important because it doesn't matter how good your experiences are, right? If you suck at describing them, you know what I mean? Maybe your letters of recommendation suck. Okay, that's number two. Maybe it's not your background. Maybe it's the application itself. Okay, now there's number three, right? Which is, call it intangible stuff, timing. Maybe you missed round one, maybe you missed round two, maybe you're at the wrong age. I know I mentioned age as number one, but really it's in section number three. Maybe you picked the wrong schools, maybe you botched the interviews, right? Intangible stuff. So the first step, everyone, I don't want this presentation to be theoretical, right? Let's be specific, right? For everyone who's on this call, we're up to 40 people, right? Which of these categories do you fall into? Maybe you fall into all of them, okay? Maybe just one. That's step one, is diagnose what happened, all right? Now, I'm not going to talk much about my company at all, just one slide here out of about 20. So just humor me for 30 seconds. We got started, I went to Harvard for business school. And after I graduated from Harvard, I had a real job for the longest time. I worked for Trammell Crow, big real estate company, ING, all these fans, making a lot of money. But I hated it. And I said, you know what, screw it. I want to do something that I enjoy instead. So my best friend, Raj, and I put our heads together. Raj and I were singers together back at Brown. Raj is a creative guy, worked in LA doing movies and stuff. I'm a business guy. Raj and I said, hey, you know what? We think to get into great schools, and we do mostly business schools, it takes both the creative and the business. That's what our company is. All right, everybody you work with has been trained by us. It's not enough to have graduated from a business school. It's not enough to be a good writer. Actually, it requires both. All right. Every year, about 20% or so of our business is reapplicants. Okay. We know what we're talking about. All right. So thank you for joining us. All right. No more commercials, I promise. All right. Why do reapplications make so much sense? That's part of why we're here, right? If you were dinged and you don't want to reapply, you're not investing your time, right? So here we are. Okay. Here's the first reason why. Well, maybe you've all had that experience where you're like writing a paper at school. I did, undergrad, and like you didn't have it backed up and you had to redo it, right? You had to like do it a second time really quickly. And what you found was maybe the second time it came out better, right? You've done this before. I promise you, if you submitted 7 applications last year, the one that you submitted first was the worst, and the one that you submitted last was the best. This is a game. This is a system. You now know how to play it, right? Okay, so you've invested that time and energy and effort. Do it again. Why? Because you're better at it now. Okay, here's another reason why. Because this time you're going to be more realistic. All right, you will not apply a third time. That's the worst thing ever. All right, also, you have an interesting brand. What do I mean by that? I mean, now maybe you've got something interesting to write about. This is now a story. Hey, remember me? I'm the kid that didn't get in last year. Let me tell you a funny story. Here's what happened. When I applied a year ago, I sucked, right? Over the past year, here's what happened. Now I'm great. That is an angle. That's a story. That's a hook. That could work. That could be interesting. Okay, we had a girl, Lauren reminded me, our COO reminded me before I went on here that we should tell a quick story about. We had a girl who got into Wharton 2 years ago, and she said, you know what, I don't want to go to Wharton. I want to go to, this is a true story, swear to God. I want to go to HBS. So she turned down Wharton, and she reapplied to Wharton and got in, also got into HBS, and decided to go to HBS, right? You're better at this. Of course, she hired us, which helps, but the point is, you're better at this the second time, okay? Now, the single most, by the way, I see some good questions are coming in already, and that's great. Keep them coming. All right. Let's keep reapplications real simple. Okay. What's the most important thing? There's only one, and that is show that you have improved. Okay. But again, don't take my word for it. And by the way, you should all buy this book. It's written by a guy named Montauk. The book is old and he's sort of outdated, but it's still the best book that exists, other than the ones, of course, that we have written. Um, anyway, we got some of these quotes from his book and some of these quotes from our own conversations with our friends. Dean at Booth says, do not rely on last year's application. Don't regurgitate information, right? HBS, I'll never understand people who simply submit the same materials after being dinged, right? It's like that great line in Mr. Mom, right? You guys are thinking, dude, how old are you? But no, it's like that great line in Mr. Mom. If you're just submitting the same crap a second time, you're doing it wrong. All right? 3 steps to a successful reapplication. Demonstrate that you've improved your candidacy. Number 2, demonstrate that you've improved your candidacy. Number 3, yep, you guessed it, demonstrate that you have improved your candidacy. How have you improved? Remember our number 1, 2, and 3 from before? How is your background better now than before? Honestly, folks, I mean, that's the most important thing. How's your background better? All right. Secondly, what about weaknesses? How have you addressed your weaknesses? In even in the application itself. Maybe your essays sucked. Maybe your letters of recommendation sucked. For the love of God, show them to someone else. It doesn't have to be me, right? Show them to something else, to someone else. Um, and then there's the other less tangible stuff, timing. Man, reapplicants, you got to hit round 1. You just do. Think about it, right? Again, common sense. How are you going to convince an admissions committee that, man, you've just been chomping at the bit ever since you were rejected? Harvard, you rejected me last year, and it's just been my goal, and I've improved myself, and man, I've just been all about it for the past year. But yeah, I still missed round 1. What? How'd that happen? No, man. Hit round 1 if you're a reapplicant. Make your point. Here's another idea. This goes back to that issue of reality check, right? Here's another idea. How about you fine tune your list of schools, right? Be a little more realistic, a little bit safer. Okay. Um, of course, if you are a reapplicant, your chances are lower. Doesn't matter how good your reapplication is, your chances are just lower. Why? Again, just common sense, right? The girl dumps you, right? And she says, yeah, I don't like you enough to date you anymore. What is she going to take you back? I mean, maybe, but probably not, right? Your chances are probably better with anyone but her, because she's the one that told you no already, right? So do yourself a favor and mix in some schools where you're not a reapplicant. Okay, also you can be perhaps a little bit more strategic. What do I mean? Well, maybe you didn't get into Harvard and Wharton and Stanford. Okay, maybe you're not Harvard material. Okay, but let's say that you're a real estate guy. All right, well, here's an idea. USC has a great real estate program. May not be a Magic 7 program, but maybe you start to think that way. Maybe you're an IT guy and you didn't get into Harvard or Stanford or whatever. Okay. Well, maybe you consider Carnegie Mellon because it's so ridiculously good for IT, right? What about local? What about local connections? Maybe you're not going to get into Harvard, but when you graduate you want to be in Texas. Okay. Well, how about Rice? How about UT Austin? How about Texas A&M? I mean, how about start to think a little bit differently, skin it a little bit differently, and you'll be mixing in some safer schools along the way as you do. Question we get all the time, can I change my career goals? The answer is easy. Yes, of course you can. In fact, maybe you should, right? Just be smart about it, right? If you say, hey, last year I wanted to do IT, and this year I want to be an investment banker, maybe that's hard to connect. Um, so you need to be smart, right? Another example, let's say last year you said investment banking, right? But you didn't get in. Well, maybe you're not investment banking. Maybe you're not an entrepreneur. Well, okay. Maybe instead of entrepreneurship, which is perhaps a bit lofty, right? Perhaps a little bit risky, maybe instead of entrepreneurship, you dial it down a little more realistic. Product management. That's still pretty entrepreneurial, but maybe instead of talking about being the next Mark Zuckerberg, instead you can talk about being a managing director at a big shop in, Silicon Valley. Can you change your career goals? Yes, absolutely. Can you change them 180 degrees? Yes, absolutely you can. You need to be smart about it. Okay? In fact, if you didn't get in, there's a good chance that your career goals are screwy anyway. We're gonna get to that a little bit later with some of our volunteers. All right. And actually, before we do go to our volunteers, there's one more point that I want to make in terms of career goals. Um, Career goals, you guys, are actually the most important thing. What do I mean? Well, this is business school, right? Um, this is not meaning of life school. This is business school. If your career goals don't make sense, you're not going to get in, right? We talked about those three buckets. One is timing, or what one is the intangible stuff, right? One of them is your background, right? I'll tell you what, if your career goals don't make any sense, none of that even matters. If you have a real estate background and you say, when I grow up, I want to be a private equity guy, and like you don't have any credibility in private equity, you're not going to get in. I promise you. Looks like we're up to about 50 people on this call. Of these 50 people, at least half of them, your career goals don't make sense. They don't make sense. Dial your career goals back, dial them down. Be safe, okay, as far as career goals are concerned. All right, and more on that as it develops. All right, we are going to introduce our first of two volunteers here. And we're going to change names, of course, and if you recognize the picture of Yogi Berra, you'll also realize that our volunteer, we'll call him Rolls-Royce, is not Yogi Berra. But so the first thing we're going to do, Rolls-Royce, if you would, we're going to switch over to your resume. And I realize, you guys, that this is going to be a little bit hard to see. But do us a favor, Rolls, and take a minute or two and just introduce yourself, if you would.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Rolls-Royce here. As John kindly pointed out I'm a British guy. I studied in London at one of the leading colleges in the UK in mathematics, and then fell headlong into investment banking for a major European bank where I enjoyed working 90-hour plus weeks on a pretty endless basis for a couple of years before I switched into a corporate banking career in the front office side, so sales and team management, very much focused on the energy and maritime sectors. This job was primarily in London. It took me to the Netherlands as well. And then for the last 3 years, I've been based in Greece, which has quite a major presence in the shipping industry as well. Whilst all that's been going on, I had a very active time in the UK working for a political organization, heavily involved in local community projects, where I probably spent at least 10 and up to 20 hours a week working on the ground with individuals, residents in pretty deprived areas of central London, trying to initiate projects for them on a very simple basis, up to putting in some more green space, planting gardens, cleaning up the river banks, up to actually trying to represent them to a bunch of MPs, members of parliament, which represent the whole of London. So I had a mixture of political and community development activities. So my goal was really, having got a bit bored of corporate life after 11 years of it, to try and introduce this community-spirited mindset in a commercial way and find some way to combine the two and get an amazing job that I'm going to enjoy for the next 30 or 40 years.
Got it. Okay, good. And let's get into some of the details here. You are a resident, or you live in Greece, but you are from England.
That's right.
Okay, got it. Your GMAT was a 720, and you, like me, are much stronger in verbal than in quant. Um,
Yeah, funnily enough, that's how it turned out. That was my first attempt.
okay. Well, is 720 your best score?
I've only taken it once, and I got above 700. I was happy with that.
Okay, good. All right, and I see that you were dinged. Gosh, you were dinged everywhere.
A couple of interviews.
Couple of interviews. Yep, there was some success for sure. HBS dinged without interview, MIT Sloan. Okay, well, while I have you, roles. If you had to guess, what do you think went wrong in your application?
Um, I'm thinking it's a combination of the three. I guess you can always improve the application, and when you're up against a tight timeline, as it was for me, it's very hard to take a critical view of what you're writing. I got a lot of help, but conflicting views, and in the end, you just want to get something out there, and probably it could have been improved a little bit. I think that explaining why I waited 11 years since I graduated from college to go back and do an MBA, where the average age of students is 26 or 27, could have been explained a little bit better. And I think also with the interviews that I had, maybe I don't present very well. On my first meeting with people, I didn't really, this sounds crazy now, I didn't really work too hard in preparing for my interviews because I didn't want to be so freaked out by the time I got there. I thought if I tried, I had all the knowledge, I had all the research. If I got there and tried to be calm and act naturally, that this would be a much easier process than cramming my head and potentially freezing up on the day.
Got
So,
it. Okay, well, good. I mean, I think that a lot of your you sound very thoughtful. I mean, obviously, I have no idea how you interviewed.